Are React hooks leaving you scratching your head? You are not alone. In this video, we will explain in a very simple way what are React hooks and what is the useState hook. Also, we'll explain the different usage of useState and how you can use different ways to set your initial state or your default state. Also, we'll see how you can update the state using different ways and compare it to normal way of using.
First things first, what are React hooks? So React hooks, they are a new concept. So they have been introduced to allow you to use state and other React features without writing component in the format of class components. So React hooks, basically they are just functions that deliver the power of React class components to functional components. And the example you see in the screen at the moment, we'll go in details later, but just to give you a glimpse on what benefits the React hooks give us. So we have two examples of the same components. They do the same things. The one on the left, it's written in the old way of class component within React, where you can use, see here we have a state, we have the lifecycle component, then we have APIs, and we have this keywords everywhere, and you can see it's very long as well, and it's not easy to read too. The one on the right side is the same components on the left, but refactored in the way it's using functional components, not class components anymore, functional components, and we are using the React hooks within that component. And you can see it's very short, it's very clear, and it's very easy to read as well. What I wanted to take from this short introduction is that React hooks introduced in React 16.8, and they are just functions that let you hook into React state and lifecycle features from function components. So before hooks, these features were exclusive only to class components, making the functional component less powerful and more for presentational purpose. The hooks change the landscape by allowing to use state and other React features in functional components, leading to more concise, readable, and easier to test code. So for today's video, let's dive into useState, one of the core hooks, and how they enable you to use React features without classes. So make sure you finish this video and subscribe if you like it. Let's jump in. As Create React app is not anymore in the standard and not used anymore, we're going to use Next.js to build our demo. So I will run the command and I'll call it Next.js app, or I'll just call it, for example, a counter. We will build in a basic counter. Click enter. Then I'll just say no, I don't want TypeScript for now. I want ESLint. Yes, I want Tailwind. It's helping with CSS. Would you like to use SRC? I'll say yes. You want app routers? I'll just say yes. I want alias import. I'll say yes as well. Would you like to do configuration? I'll say yes. And then that will create for me a boilerplate. So I'll just pause the video until this one finishes. So I will do cd counter, which is the project name I created, and then I'll say npm run dev, and that should run it for me in the browser. Okay, as soon as you run in the browser, you see the default template of the boilerplate come with Next.js. I'll just go and clean it up. I don't need all this. The useState hook is a foundational element of React that allows you to add state to functional components. Before this, the hooks were introduced. The state could only be used in class components. Now, with hooks like the useState, functional component like this one we have here now can hold and manage state as well, making them very powerful and easy to manage. So in this example here, I have added a basic HTML. Don't look at the CS and all that stuff, it's just to make it look pretty. So we are trying to add a counter, basically, set very basic demo, where we want to increment and decrement whenever we click, okay? And the value we want to display it right here. So to do that, of course, when you increment, decrement, that's a value changing, right? So we need a place where we can store it. So first thing we do is we import useState from React. So just remember, useState or the hooks, they are again just functions that help us do magical things in our components. Okay, so the useState for us, it behaves as like a magical box, okay, which can hold some data for us within our components that we need to keep changing or reusing whenever it changes. Okay, one of the rules of React hooks is that you can't call these hooks within a class component. You only can call the hooks within a functional component. The other rule is that you can't have the hooks outside of your functional components. All the hooks need to be used inside your functional component. Okay, so we will come inside our functional components, and then you can call your useState. Okay, and useState can accept a default value you can pass to. Okay, and let's say, for example, in the counter, the default value would be 0. And the useState, we said, is a function and return for us something. Okay, and what's return for us? An array. And what we will do, we'll do a destructuring syntax for this array. Okay, so it's a const, and it gives us an array of 2 elements. The first element, it is the state itself. Okay, so you can give it any name you want. I will call my state count. Okay, then the second element in our array that is returned from our useState function or hook, it is a function that helps us to reset the state whenever we want. Okay, and again, you can call this function anything you want, but for me, when I have big applications, I try to keep the state name and this function that helped me to set it have the same name, only the function have an extra set. Okay, so I know it's a function and I say set count. So basically up to now what we have done is that we created a state for us, okay, and we created also a function or that help us to reset this state every time we need it. Now the basic things we can do is we can go here and we can call our state to display and click save. So you can see here error on the right side. You say you're importing component that needs useState. It only works in a client component. The none of it is parent as use client. Okay, because I'm using Next.js, I need to say that I'm using a use client service. Okay, because Next.js also have server-side components too. So I can go to pages and just add this one right here, and that should save for me the problem. Okay. Now, what we have done until now is that we displayed the count state in our UI. And because we set the default value as 0, you can see the 0 is right there. Okay. Now, if you click the minus and the plus, of course they're not working because we didn't add any on-click function on our buttons. Okay. Now, I'll come here, I'll say on-click, and I'll say increment. Okay, and on this button, oh no, that will be decrement. So here on click with a plus, it will be increment, and this one will be decrement. Okay, now we'll come here after our state hook, and then we'll declare our functions. Const decrement, and I'll declare another function also for increment. So you can see here I'm using the arrow functions. You can also use normal functions, the syntax, if you want to. Now in decrement, what we want to do is that we want to reduce the count by 1. Okay, so I'll use this function that I got from the useState, and I'll say count -1. Okay, same thing in increment. I'll call this function which will help me set this state, and but I'll say count +1. Okay, now let's see if this is working. Minus plus So it's working as expected. Okay, so many of you must be asking now, and most of you are not coming from React background, is that why we are using something like this to get a state and just update it and then display it? Why we don't just use a regular variables? Okay, so let me explain you this. I'll add also some console log. So I add some logs for you here. So let's click, for example, increment, okay? And you can see here increment is updating my state, then I'm console logging that state plus 1. So when I click plus, you have increment state count plus 1. So the way it works, the state, is that whenever the state changes, your whole component re-renders again. And when it re-renders again, it picks up the new value of your state, which is count. And that's why we're able to show it right here every time we click. I'll show you also in the profiler how that works. So if I go to profiler, I'll record, and then I will click plus, and then I will stop recording. So you can see here I have one full render happened. And if I scroll down, you see here that's my component under home. And if I hover on it, I don't know if you can see that, but it says why this renders. And it says hook 1 changed, okay? So hook 1 changed, that's another rule about React. Your hooks are performed or actioned by order. So if I have here many use states, okay, they'll be all by order, and this is the first one. Okay, and that's make another call is you can't have hooks inside a conditional statement. The reason why is in some conditions it may run, in some other conditions it may not run, which will break the hooks order within your functional component. Okay, so let's go back here. So we can see this component is rendered. That's a proof that it's fully re-rendered when we click the button. And the reason why is because your hook has been changed, okay? And we know that because we incremented the state, which trigger our hook to change. Now let's try to use a variable. I'll add a variable here under my state, or you can add it in your functional component. So I'll say let regular count, okay? And we'll initialize it as 0 as well, okay? And in my increment function, I'll use that one alone as example, but it should explain what will happen anytime we really want to try to do also in decrement. If I come right here, under the set count, I'll say regular count plus 1, okay? So basically, I'm incrementing, what I'm doing, okay? I'm incrementing my regular count by 1 as I'm doing here for my state, okay? So if I come here and paste the regular count variable, and we'll be able to see what is the status of both of them, okay? I'll refresh my browser and we start from fresh start. Then let's click plus, okay? So the increment state count is 1 and the regular count is 1, okay? So wow, that's the same thing. No, it's not the same thing. If I come here and I copy and paste this one and I try to access my regular count, you will see that's 1 and that's still 0. So we'll start from fresh. This is our state and this is our regular variable, okay? We click plus and you can see that. See, this one's been increased, was our state, but our regular variable, even though the value has changed, in the browser or in the UI is not able to access the new one. It still accesses the default value that we had first time. And the simple reason for that is because updating your regular count does not re-render your component to pick up the new value. And that's why React components are completely different way to work with. They're not just normal functions, they are JSX functions, okay? So make sure you don't use regular variables within your components, but you use the actual state, and useState hook make it very simple for you to handle all these scenarios. Now let's start and try something crazy. Okay, Let's say, for example, when I click the plus button, I want to trigger this one twice, okay? I don't want to do, for example, not that one. I don't want to do +2, but I want to trigger it twice, okay? Because I want to show you a problem that will occur and how we can solve it. Now, if you do this and we click save, so the increment basically should work in the way when I click the button, it should increment by 2, okay? Now let's click here, you can see still 1. So what just happened and why this happened? So in React, the state updates may be asynchronous for performance reasons. This means that you cannot always rely on the current state, okay? Reflecting the most recent update when you update the state based on its previous. So for this scenario, we have to use something called prevState. So what is a prevState? First, let me show you a demo and then I'll explain you what that means, okay? So I will say the set count, it is a function and by default it have access to the previous state that you have before you update it, okay? So I will access the previous state, okay? Then I'll say update for me the previous state, prevState +1, okay? Now, if we keep only 1, of course we should see 1 updating, but if I do 2 of them running, save. Now let me refresh. If I click this one, see, now it's working, okay? It's adding by 2s. So how this worked now and why this one working now but wasn't working before? The previous state, it refers to the previous state of a component or system before an update occurs. And understanding the previous state usability is very crucial and very important, okay? The previous state ensures that you're working with your correct data, especially in the situation where state changes are rapid and depending on the previous one. So the way the prevState it works, it waits for whatever an update is happening before. When it finishes, then it will make sure this hook is running now and picking up the latest updated state, then doing the performance that you need to do onto it. And like here, we run the first one. When we run it, the second one will not run, okay? Enter the first one completed, then it will pick up the updated one, okay? So that is the amazing functionality of prevState. Now let's go back to our first line we write in the beginning of the code and let's look at this default value. So we said useState accept a default value. It can be a number, a string, anything, even it can be a function, okay? Now, there is one problem happening when you set up a useState with default value like this, okay? Like direct an object on array or a string or whatever. Problem with that is that whenever your component re-renders, as I showed you before, whenever you click or a hook is triggered, your whole component is re-rendering again, okay? And problem with this, every time it re-renders, it sets your count state initially to 0 and then update it, okay? Now, let's assume that your default value is not that simple, but it's some big calculation that you're doing behind the scene to set up some object or some array or something like that, okay? So this one will have a big impact on your application performance and to slow it down. And basically you don't need it to run on every render. Most of the scenarios, if I don't say 100% scenarios, when you have a default value, you just want it for the first time when your component renders. You don't want it in the next re-renders happening, okay? Now how we can fix this? Now we can use, of course, functions, and I'll show you how this runs only one time. So I will declare an anonymous function inside my useState, okay? And for now, I'll just add cancel log. I'll say initial render, okay? And then, of course, I want the value 0, return 0, okay? Now, if I go refresh my browser, you can see my console log is here, right? And if I click this, you can see I can't see that console log again, which means my initial value was set only for the first time. And this is where functions can be very helpful to update your performance of your application. Now you may have question, okay, why I don't use my own function trigger it instead of using an anonymous function or wrapping my function within an anonymous function. Let me show you. Let me declare a function, okay, called my function, and this function basically will just do this. So what we were doing before is this. We just explicitly write that code here, but now I will trigger my function. Okay, and let's see what happened. Our hard refresh. Oops, I have to remove these. Okay, so basically again here I kept my function wrapped within anonymous function within use effect. Okay, hard refresh. I will add plus, so it's working, and also my cancel log is only once. Okay, that's means this function is only running the first time when my component re-entered. Now, if I trigger my function directly from the use state, let's save. I will hard refresh. Let me remove this from here. So you can see the first time here is rendered. Okay, this one is not a second render. It's just a hook cancel log, so you can see here, okay, but it's a one render. Now I click plus, you see it's rendered again, plus rendered again, plus rendered again. So basically if you declare your function and trigger it directly within use state, you are doing again the same problem you're trying to fix. Your initial state will try to set up the initial or default value every time your component re-enters. Okay, so make sure if you are using functions to improve performance, you wrap it within an anonymous function, just like that. Let's try again. There we go. We only have one render, and that's all. Let's say, for example, now we don't have just a simple variable or simple default value coming through, but we have an object. Okay, so useState also help us to deal very easily with object. So let's say, for example, I have count 0. Okay, so now I'm not getting count as a number, but as an object. Okay, so how I can go and update the state here? So let's go first to the decrement function. Okay, and let's also fix this one to use the previous state. Let's copy this one here and this put minus. Okay, don't worry about the error on the right. It's because we are trying to access here the object now to display it. We'll fix it later. So now we come to the previous state. So now we can't just do previous state minus 1 because our previous state or our even current state is an object. Okay, so the way we can do that is we spread our object first, which is the previous state. Okay, then comma, then I'll say pick up the property count within my state because that's the one I want to update. Then I will say previous state dot count minus 1. Okay, and same thing here. Again, I'll just remove this and say okay, return for me again. It's an object, right? So first I'll spread off my object previous state, then I'll say okay, the property count in my object, I want to update it with my previous state, which is an object now, dot count plus 1. Okay, save, not yet actually. I'll do state is count dot count. Okay, and let's see if this one working. Maybe this will be confusing. Let me call this one state, and this one we call it state. Okay, save, and let's clean up this. Now let's do plus. See, this is working. Okay, that's using objects. And why we do use the spreading operator and update exactly the state or the property within that object we need is that because we want to ensure we don't mutate the original state by accident and change it. That will create a lot of bugs and a lot of issues, and also if you have very complex data or very complex objects within your components. So you have to be very careful when you're doing this set state with object. Now many of you may be wondering, the one that have more experience, is that how useState is using Object.is for comparison behind the scenes. So we'll use a very simple demo to explain you this. First things first is that what is Object.is? Object.is is just a new method in JavaScript introduced in ECMAScript 6. It is used to compare two values for equality. It's not like the triple equal operator. Object.is handles special cases also like -0 and +0 being considered equal, and not a number being considered equal to itself. This makes it suitable for comparing complex data structure, including objects and arrays as well. I highly recommend you to look at this documentation. It will help you to have a better understanding on how Object.is works and how many benefits it's bringing to us in the new JavaScript world. Now let's go back to our example, and I'll try to explain you within our example how this one is working. Okay, so in our component, the useState here, it's used to declare our initial value, and I'll fix this one and put them back to 0. They're easier to understand. Now let's go back to our example, and I'll explain you how really this Object.is is working behind the scene for our useState to help us do the comparison and help us to only re-render our components when it's needed. So our useState at the moment, it is declared a state for us called count, okay, and it initializes its value at 0. The setCount function returned by the useState is used to update our count state. Now let's assume that the React library behind the scene uses Object.is. And I'll write for you here a very small function, okay? This one is used in React for state comparison when setCount is called, okay? So of course, if you see this useState, that's the hook we are calling, and that's the initial value, okay? So what's doing? It is storing the initial value within a variable. Then that is our setter function, the setState, which we called here our setCount, okay? So what it does is, it's called the setState the first time compares the current state, okay, with the new state that we passed in. So if you go back to our code, that is the setState and that is your new state value, okay? So whenever you call the set function or the setState function, it is doing a comparison between the new one and the old one. Then it says, okay, if these objects are the same or these states are the same, then we don't need to trigger any re-render, we just return false. Otherwise, you are setting up the state in this variable to the new state. Then we are triggering our new re-render of our components, okay? And in the end, we return our new state and the setup function.
Now I encourage you to go and experiment with useState in your project. It is a powerful tool that simplifies state management in React functional components and can greatly improve your development workflow. If you found this tutorial helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment with any questions or topics you would like to learn about next. Your feedback helps us create more valuable content just for you.